All right, live pictures right now of Boston, and you see what appears to be hundreds of people descending on the downtown Boston area, many who have marched for many blocks, others who have gathered in a park in downtown Boston, all in the names of, and these are dueling demonstrations, we understand, all in the names of free speech and peace and love. And this happening a week after what we saw unfolding in Virginia. And in the wake of Charlottesville, a growing question of whether Confederate monuments should continue to stand across the U.S. The Southern Poverty Law Center says there are at least 1,500 that dot the nation. Last night in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a Confederate soldier statue was defaced. In Durham, 8 have been arrested for tearing down a memorial. And the mayors of Baltimore and Birmingham removed or covered Confederate statues earlier in the week. The nation's largest Confederate memorial is at Stone Mountain, Georgia, a place Dr. Martin Luther King made reference to in his I Have a Dream speech. Let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia. Well, today, it's a place of many uses and points of view. With a bird's eye view of Atlanta, just 20 miles away, the nation's largest monument memorializing Civil War Confederate leaders. The 90-foot-tall carving of Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson prominently on the north face of Georgia's nearly 900-foot-high Stone Mountain. The centerpiece of a state park attracting 3 million tourists, bikers, joggers, and hikers a year.
Seeing the world from kind of a God's eye view.
And now, again, the carving here making it a centerpiece of discussions as hot as the August sun.
Yeah, I'm conscious of them.
Is it kind of comfortably ignoring it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Why is that?
Because I believe that stands for like the old way the United States was. Now we're more, a melting pot more than ever now.
I don't think you can erase history. It happened, I think people have to learn from it, because if you erase it, people don't know.
You can voice your opinion, but don't force it on somebody else.
Passionate views following the disturbing images 500 miles away at the white nationalist gatherings in Virginia involving a Confederate monument. The death of anti-hate protest demonstrator Heather Heyer laid to rest this week, and following the U.S. president's comments about removing Confederate symbols.
You're changing history, you're changing culture.
And his tweets, the president asking, who's next? On Stone Mountain, among those we talked to, a resounding feeling that actions speak louder than symbols.
It's a really sad issue. I don't think taking away the carvings for changing anybody's heart. You have to change the heart first.
And while this nation's largest monument to Confederate leaders may be a high point for other individuals and groups like this one,
God bless America!
Posing with Confederate flags atop the mountain, posting it on Facebook, and later saying they would defend the monument. Is it really etched into the consciousness of everyone who comes here?
Not necessarily. A lot of the people that take advantage of what the park has to offer really doesn't come in this area.
John Bankhead, the public information officer for Stone Mountain, says this summer, for the first time in a long time, it received a cross-burning request by a group identifying itself as the Ku Klux Klan, a request denied this month. How much of that is true?
This request was made in May. And we had to go to the legal people here in Georgia, the Attorney General's office, to get opinions on what we can do to deny it. And we never intended to allow that to go on here. Given, we know the history of this park, we know the history of this mountain, but we're just not going to allow that to happen.
So has a request like that happened often this year?
No, first time. It's the first time it's ever happened other than 1962.
Part of the memorialization was an effort to try to remember these men who had sacrificed during war. But it happened at the same time that a much broader kind of political project was going on in the South, in which the southern states had passed laws that were disfranchising African Americans and were restoring kind of white rule.
In Georgia, despite a flurry of tweets from a Democratic gubernatorial candidate urging the removal or sandblasting at Stone Mountain, and the Georgia NAACP stating,
"We, as the birthplace of the civil rights movement, must act in accordance with true American values."
Any change at Stone Mountain is complicated. Georgia state law has a clear mandate for the memorial, saying it should be, quote, preserved and protected for all time as a tribute to the bravery and heroism of the citizens of this state who suffered. The carving of this monument was a 60-year project, initially involving a sculptor of South Dakota's Mount Rushmore. Stone Mountain would be completed under President Richard Nixon's administration. 45 years later, under the nation's 45th president, Stone Mountain's carving and Confederate monuments like it, both landmarks and lightning rods. And underscoring another perspective of Americans on the removal of Confederate statues in the U.S., this NPR poll shows 62% of those polled believe that Confederate memorials and statues should remain. Joining me right now is Michael Eric Dyson. He's the author of Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. Michael, good to see you. So it has been one heck of a week. And in this last week, several monuments, have been torn down, have been covered, some even vandalized. What do you think of civilians taking matters particularly into their own hands, like we saw in Durham, North Carolina, where they took down a statue? Citizens taking it into their hands as opposed to mayors like in Birmingham or in Baltimore who have covered monuments.
Right, or earlier in New Orleans under Mitch Landrieu. Look, I think it's extremely important that citizens understand this is not a neutral and objective test case of the American memory. When people say, hey, leave these statues up because after all we have to deal with history, are you really dealing with history? The litmus test is in the following. Do those statues provide opportunities for people widely and broadly to discuss the racist reactions of this country and resistance to African American people and other allies in the fight over democracy? Not really. Those statues are usually evoked for that reason. They are the source of pride. They are the source of pride for those in the South who feel that the war is still being prosecuted, that the Civil War goes on. What the Civil War historians call that late unpleasantness is still with us. So the reality is that it's important for citizens to literally, like Bree Newsom climbing the pole to take down a flag, or these citizens in Durham, North Carolina, who said we must take matters into our own hand. We wish the government would do so, but civil disobedience is an extremely important part of the American project. Martin Luther King Jr. and others engaged in it. And I think the nation must be forced to come to grips with the fact that memory is critical. There is no such thing as neutrality, that these statues reinforce white supremacy, and the attempt of America to push into our collective consciousness a stream that is marginal and yet serious, that is, secessionists who wanted to leave this nation. It is amazing to me that Colin Kaepernick can be the subject of such consternation in the NFL and in America for refusing to stand for the anthem because he believes it dishonors his people, and yet people walking in the Confederate, walking with the Confederate flag and celebrating neo-Nazism have not been similarly assaulted as un-American. So what we're fighting here, I think, Fred, is the future of this nation when it comes to how we properly memorialize what we think is important. And let's not pretend that what dots the landscape in terms of these statues reflects the American character. And it's public space. That means all of us have to recognize its importance. Therefore, it should be fought over. And I think those statues and other emblems should be removed.
And so we've heard all of these sentiments, so many sentiments all week long, particularly because we have reached a particular high point this week. Among them, Lawrence Kusnar, an anthropology professor who studies monuments and sacred spaces, told the Washington Post, saying this: I detest the legacy of division, bigotry, and slavery these monuments represent, but I think they should remain. These pieces of metal and stone only have the meaning we assign to them, and that meaning can take any form that we like. So as a continuation of that kind of thought, you've heard a number of people, including the president, who say taking down these memorials means erasing history. And so what's your response to that and the use of the word erase in this context?
I'm not sure. In Germany, do they have statues of Hitler? Do they have statues representing their Nazi past? Do they celebrate it as a neutral, objective examination of history and the fracas and chaos that were the occasion for such battle? I don't think so. So let's not pretend. Look, I get it. I get the fact that these are monuments that should be examined. Put them in a museum. Put them somewhere where they should be examined, like this is a relic of our past that needs to be seen as something negative and something that undermined the capacity of all people to come together. If that's the case, why don't we litter the landscape with memorials dedicated to a whole range of things that transgender people or, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people or African American people and the like. These monuments, therefore, are meant to summarize American ideals. And now that we are advanced to a point where we see that this is a shameful part of the past, they must not be allowed to remain in the present to radiate that hate. Because contrary to what the professor has indicated, what we see these statues doing is mobilizing people who want a flashpoint for their own present form of racism and bigotry and white supremacy. They don't deal with that. These things continue to be radioactive. So in that sense, they are live, living, breathing reminders of a heinous past that continues to exist in America. And until we confront them and pull those monuments down, put them in a museum somewhere, talk about them in classrooms as horrible representations of who we are, we will continue to give life and breath to those bigots in America.
And now 1 week away from what we saw unfold in Charlottesville, here we're looking at live pictures as you and I speak of Boston and the hundreds, what seem to be hundreds of people who have descended on that city. There are dueling rallies. Some are there in the name of free speech. Others are there in the name of peace and love. Do you believe this kind of gathering represents a type of awakening in America, or how would you assess what's happening right now?
Absolutely. With all due respect to Tina Fey, who said that, hey, you shouldn't go out there and oppose them, just eat some cake. No, we can't just let them eat cake. We've got to oppose bigotry and hate where we find it. If Martin Luther King Jr. had taken the Fey route, he would have never given an I Have a Dream speech or contested racist bigots who attempted to undermine American democracy. So I think it's extremely important that in Boston, itself a city of such tremendous, torturous race relations in America, a place where an American citizen was, I think a black lawyer, was beat with an American flagpole. So the reality is Boston has its own vitriol and its own hate, and yet this becomes the site of a counter-protest that demands peace. Yes, respect for free speech is extremely important, but even more important is respect for life and the vital means by which we sustain that life. So I think what's going on in Boston is extremely important, and the rest of the nation must reflect the same kind of resistance to the hate and disavowal of American principles that we all claim to adhere to.
Michael Eric Dyson, always good to see and hear from you. Thank you so much as we continue to look at these live pictures out of Boston. Quite extraordinary a show of people coming together there for their common causes and to counter other causes. All right, we'll continue to keep a close watch on all that's happening in Boston and beyond, and we'll be right back.